Hello everybody, my name is Kevin Non-Tridecath, and I'm a non-traditional ex-Catholic, maybe still Catholic, it kind of depends on how you define your terms, but in today's video I'm going to respond to Inspiring Philosophy responding to my question on Trinity Radio. So, I'm going to share my screen. Last week I made a video that I called "The Catholic Church Sealed Its Fate in 1312, the Law of Conservation of Energy Disproves the Church." So in that video, I was commenting on how the Catholic Church was committed to mind-body dualism and how mind-body dualism is untenable due to the problem of the conservation of energy. Well, that's prompted a decent amount of discussion in the comment section of that video as well as just elsewhere online. And so when the Trinity Radio team had a Q&A with Chris Date, Inspiring Philosophy, and a couple other guests, I decided that I would pose a question in there. And I did, and I'm going to play that clip now.
And the second you claim that your opinion about a secondary or tertiary doctrine is true, it's the same, which the Bible doesn't seem to care about that much, or otherwise it would have answered that question in a way that we all agree on. So.
Well, before we ruin that beautiful idea that Chris just floated, let's move on to one of our favorite atheists, Kevin Non-Tridecath.
I'm going to pause right here just to comment that Braxton did call me an atheist. I don't use that label. I don't particularly mind that label. If you said, "Are you a theist or an atheist?" I'd probably not be like, well, technically, I'd probably just say I'm an atheist. But I'm not an atheist by like the definition of the way that the term is used in like philosophy textbooks and things like that. Just, I thought it was worth pointing out. But Trinity Radio treats me really nice. I really like Braxton. I actually talk with Pritchett on Facebook every now and then. So I like all them, and I do not mind at all if they call me an atheist. It's just a label. I don't particularly care. I just wanted to point that out.
Tradcath. Are Christians necessarily obligated to accept mind-body dualism due to souls?
If so, I'm not a Christian, I guess.
Well, yeah, you're not anyway.
If y'all are MD dualists, how do you...
And that was a typo. I said MD. I meant MB, mind-body dualists. Oh, well.
...get around the conservation of energy problem?
Oh, okay. I can get around that easily.
Okay. So I did intend this question for really any of them. My channel and my pursuits on YouTube are primarily to respond to Catholic thought only. But I respect Inspiring Philosophy. I disagree with him almost everywhere, but I respect him a lot. I think he's a really smart individual. I really like Braxton. I really like Jonathan Pritchett. I like Chris Date. I like all these guys. I watch all of their content. So I was kind of just throwing it out there just to see what the non-Catholic Christian opinion was, even though I'm mostly concerned with Catholic Christians. But I figured Inspiring Philosophy would pick up on this one because this is kind of his wheelhouse. So he jumps in here and says, "Ooh, easy. Let's see what he says," and then I'll respond to it.
So I'm an idealist, so I don't even think there's a problem because I say all is mind. But there's a neuroscientist named John Eccles who wrote about this, and he said, it's not so much this idea that a soul has to sort of add energy in to make decisions in the brain. This you got to think of it more in quantum, is what he's talking about, quantum forms. There's a probability wave in certain neurons.
I'm only interrupting to say that I'm going to address each of his points in turn, starting with the idealism and all is mind, but I'm going to let him continue for now.
And all the soul has to do is sort of shift probability one way or the other. Mm-hmm. So it's not so much this idea that you have to sort of add energy to change. You just got to shift probability fields, which we already know happens.
Could we say, on your view, because of quantum mechanics, could we say, it could be, this might be a bit speculation, that this happens by observation?
Absolutely, that is my view.
Then that wouldn't require. Would it be true then that doesn't require energy transfer?
Okay, so I'm gonna cut them off here only because they do give me a little bit of a lengthy response, which is quite nice. But I can't respond to all of it, of course. I mean, I'm going to respond to as much of it as I can. And I've prepared a couple slides that I would like to present. Not slides, just some journal articles and such. But I think first it might be prudent for me to start with who Inspiring Philosophy is, in case anybody doesn't know. So I have to admit, I never actually looked into his credentials, partially because I don't really care about credentials, to be 100% honest. I think that, like, saying that, oh, I'm not going to listen to your argument because you don't have a PhD in, whatever, is kind of dumb. I don't think that you need a PhD in a certain field to be able to comment on it, as long as you're referencing, like, good sources and stuff. Like if Michael Jones was trying to make a new claim about neurochemistry and he didn't have a degree in neurochemistry, then maybe I'd have a problem with it. But as far as I can tell, he doesn't do that. He's aware of his limitations, and he quotes sources the same way that I do. So but just so that I knew, like, who exactly am I talking to, I did want to just, like, stalk him real quick and see if he has a degree in neuroscience or anything. I don't think he does. Again, not that it matters. I do see a bachelor's in film. Cool. My bachelor's is in chemical engineering, not neuroscience. I did take a decent amount of physics, but nothing quantum. And I'm going to speak more about quantum physics in a little bit, because I have strong opinions about appealing to quantum physics when it comes to anything related to philosophy. But let's take Inspiring Philosophy's response one step at a time. So first of all, this is a Catholic, or at least a Catholic adjacent YouTube channel. So I am going to tie Inspiring Philosophy's response to the Catholic Church, even though Inspiring Philosophy himself, Michael Jones, is not Catholic. So his off-the-cuff response is, oh, well, this isn't a problem for me because I think everything is mind. Nothing is actually body. So he's not a dualist. In the same way that I'm not a dualist, he's not a dualist. But when I say that everything is, body, right? Everything is matter. He's saying everything is mind. This is not an option for Catholics. I have two sources to back me up on that. The first is the Catholic Encyclopedia, and the second is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Encyclopedia clearly says that the soul is defined as the ultimate internal principle by which we think, feel, and will, and by which our bodies are animated. So then they do differentiate the soul from the mind. The mind is generally the conscious parts of the body, while the soul denotes the source of the vegetative activities as well. So that might be like the beating of your heart. You don't control the beating of your heart with your mind, but your soul does control the beating of your heart. So that is what the encyclopedia says. Then it says that our vital activities proceed from a principle capable of subsisting in itself is the thesis of the sustainability of the soul, that this principle is not itself composite, extended, corporeal, or essentially and intrinsically dependent on the body, is the doctrine of spirituality. So they are making a pretty clear distinction between the body and the soul. So you have to, if you're Catholic, you have to think that humans are all bodies and souls, not just souls. Inspiring Philosophy seems to think that we're all just souls, which, hey, you're not Catholic. You're not bound by these teachings. But I do just want to point out that this is not an escape. So Inspiring Philosophy's off-the-cuff response is, oh, well, I could be a dualist, and that wouldn't be a problem because I'm not Catholic. I'm not bound to mind-body dualism the way that Catholics are. Now, of course, he doesn't say that. I didn't even phrase the question like that. But that off-the-cuff response from Inspiring Philosophy is only available to non-Catholic Christians. Let's take a look at the Catechism of the Catholic Church. This is Catechism of the Catholic Church, Part 1, Section 2, Chapter 1, Article 2, Body and Soul, but truly one. Paragraph 362, the human person created in the image of God is a being at once corporeal and spiritual. Not spiritual and spiritual the way that Michael Jones, Inspiring Philosophy, says, not corporeal and corporeal the way that I would insist, but rather corporeal and spiritual. There's that mind-body dualism again. Paragraph 364 quotes, man made of body and soul is a unity. And I believe that's actually from canon law. So Catholics are definitely bound to mind-body dualism. The off-the-cuff Michael Jones Inspiring Philosophy response is not available to Catholic Christians. It is only available to non-Catholic Christians. Okay, well, that's fine. Why don't we take a look at the other responses that Michael Jones gave? Because Michael Jones was kind enough to be like, hey, that's not a problem for me because I'm not a mind-body dualist, but if I was, here's how I'd respond to it. So he quotes from John Eccles, who is John Eccles? John Eccles was a neurophysiologist who died in 1997. He won the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1963 for his work on synapses. He wrote a couple books. His 1973 book, Understanding of the Brain, talks more about philosophy than science as I understand it. Now, I haven't read the book, but he also... So in that book, he actually doesn't call himself a mind-body dualist. He calls himself like a trialist. You'll see here. Trialist interactionists. So he thinks that there's like 3 separate worlds, not just the physical and not just the mental, but he separates the physical, then the states of consciousness, and then knowledge in the objective sense. So he's got like this tri thing going on, not just dualism. But then he wound up writing a book shortly before he died in the early 90s called How the Self Controls the Brain. I think that book is going to be a little bit more interesting to look into. So here's the article, How the Self Controls its Brain, released in 1994. Eccles died only 3 years later, I believe, in 97. Yes, that's right. So 3 years after this book was published, he died. And Eccles writes about what he calls dendrins, which are cylindrical bundles of neurons arranged vertically in 6 outer layers or laminate of the cortex, each cylinder being about 60 micrometers in diameter. Now that 60 micrometers is important because that is not a quantum distance. So he says, in willed actions or thoughts, psions act as dendrons and for a moment increase the probability of firing of selected neurons through quantum tunneling effects and synaptic exocytosis, while in perception, the reverse process takes place. So this is exactly what Michael Jones' Aspiring Philosophy was talking about. The soul might be changing the probability of certain reactions in the brain such that free will exists because of like quantum indeterminacy. Okay. I have a lot of problems with this. The first of which is just whenever anybody appeals to quantum anything, my quack senses start tingling. I have a degree in chemical engineering. I've taken a decent amount of physics. Chemical engineering is all about... It's mostly like thermochemistry, to be honest. But thermochemistry is like this interesting intersection of physics and chemistry. And to be clear, like physics and chemistry kind of collapse into the same subject at like higher levels. Base level chemistry and base level physics, like Newtonian physics, very different than chemistry. But the higher up you get in each, the more the two start relying on each other, and they're kind of just the same topic. So all of that to say, I don't have a degree in quantum anything, and hardly anyone does, and it's very complicated and very difficult. I feel like I know enough physics to know how much I don't know, if that makes sense. So whenever somebody with less education than me in science starts talking about quantum stuff, my quack bells go off. Because if I don't even understand it, why would I expect you to understand it? You know, like I've studied, you know, and again, it's just an engineering degree. I'm not a scientist. I'm hardly even an engineer. But appeals to quantum always make my quack senses tingle. So let's take a look at some scientific journal articles. I've selected 2 that talk about mind-brain interaction with violation of physical laws that were written after John Eccles passed. So Eccles passed in 97. I have 2 articles, one from 99 and one from 2006. So not as recent as I would like, but these are the first 2 that I found. And this is more recent than anything that Eccles has done. So in David L. Wilson's Mind-Brain Interaction and the Violation of the Physical Laws from the Journal of Conscious Studies, published in 1999, he writes a really good article, and to be honest, it gets a little complicated. To be clear, It gets more complicated than I fully understand. He has an appendix here where he actually talks about some like real quantum stuff that frankly I don't understand. Like I know what Planck's constant is, but frankly, like what delta E and delta T, I mean, like, I understand like change in time, like okay, but delta T here means something about uncertainty in time. I frankly don't understand anything in the appendix. Luckily, this article is written in plain enough English that I was able to glean some useful information from it. And particularly section 7 is pretty high level. So this is just discussion. Section 7, I've highlighted 2 portions. First, there appears to be no way that a non-physical mind could act without violating physical laws. Furthermore, there appears to be no obvious way, consistent with our knowledge of neurophysiology and neurochemistry, for such a non-physical mind to bring about volitional acts by altering brain events at only a quantum level within quantum mechanical uncertainty. This appears right to me. Even if somehow a person was able to affect the quantum probabilities of certain events that happen inside of your brain, once you get to the level of an individual neuron, quantum effects are not applicable. The way that your neurons fire is not going to be described in like particularly quantum ways. When we're talking about quantum stuff, we're talking about like molecules interacting, not cells. Like once you get to the level of a cell, you are way too big to really be appealing to anything quantum. In as far as I can tell, anyway. Again, I'm not a neurochemistry person or anything like that. Willison goes on, in summary, our current understanding of brain functions has reached a stage such that violations of physical laws appear to be necessary if a non-physical mind is to influence the brain. And again, this is written after Eccles passed. Beyond the seemingly necessary violations of the physical laws, any such non-physical entity would require some means of selectively influencing the appropriate channels or synapses among the many trillions existing in the brain. No mean task. Yeah, so how are you going to use quantum anything to influence synapses between neurons? That's way too big to be talking about anything quantum. So, Eccles himself, undoubtedly a brilliant person, undoubtedly smarter than I am, all that good stuff. However, more recent science seems to be disagreeing with Eccles, and this appears to be the trend. Eccles appears to be in the minority of people who, if alive today, would have had these ideas. And who's to say if Eccles was, Eccles' work was published, like 30 years ago now? What's the late 90s? No, 20 years ago. Sorry, I can't do math. I swear I have an engineering degree. But if Eccles was alive today, he might have a different opinion. I don't know. Let's look at one more before we end this video. But this is even more recent, 2006. It's called Quantum Mechanics in the Brain. Physicists, ignorant of modern neurobiology, are tempted to assume a formal or even dualistic view of the mind-brain problem. Meanwhile, cognitive neuroscientists and neurobiologists consider the quantum world to be irrelevant to their concerns and therefore do not attempt to understand its concepts. What can we confidently say about the current relationship between these two fields of inquiry? Okay. So, it would appear as if people who are deep into the quantum physics and stuff want to appeal to quantum indeterminacy, like to hold on to beliefs about free will or something like that. But people who actually study the brain aren't concerned with anything quantum because the brain isn't like a quantum thing. No single neuron is responsible for any kind of decision that we make. Every decision that we make it involves many, many, many neurons. And once you get to the size of a single neuron, you're already outside of quantum. The way that neurons fire is going to be entirely deterministic. There's nothing indeterministic about the way that neurons fire because we're not at the quantum level. All biological organisms must obey the laws of physics, both classical and quantum. Okay, if biological organisms must obey the laws of physics, classical physics, it's deterministic. If your brain has to obey the classical laws of physics, if you don't get to appeal to quantum stuff and quantum indeterminacy, we're determinist. That's it. In contrast to classical physics, quantum mechanics is fundamentally indeterministic. It explains a range of phenomena that could be understood within a classical context. The fact that light or a small particle can behave like a wave or particle depending on the experimental setup, the inability to simultaneously determine with perfect accuracy position and momentum, that's Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Yeah, so these things are fine when you're talking about things as small as like a photon or an electron or an atom, even a single atom. But a cell is massive, massive. Cells are way bigger than single atoms. I mean, just think about DNA. All of those codes in DNA, like the little letters that are like linked to each other, each one of those letters is not even a single atom. Each one of those letters are chains of proteins. So those are like hundreds and hundreds, I think, atoms in each portion of your DNA. So we are way outside the realm of quantum physics once we get to the size of a neuron, and a single neuron isn't going to determine anything in the brain anyway. Quantum physicists view the brain as classical instruments. That's it. That's I think that's the death knell for anybody who wants to appeal to anything quantum to be a mind-body dualist. This article goes on to say that although brains obey quantum mechanics, they don't seem to exploit any of its special features, which, yeah, because they can't, because brains are not the size of photons. It has already been demonstrated, however, that many previous mysterious aspects of perception and action are explainable in terms of conventional neuron processing, which is going to be classical. That's not going to be quantum. So, and then lastly, why should evolution have turned to quantum computation so fickle and capricious if classical neural network computations are evidently sufficient to deal with the problems encountered by the nervous system? That's it. We don't need quantum mechanics to explain the brain. Now, of course, we don't understand everything that goes on in the brain. I especially don't understand everything that goes on in the brain. I'm just an engineer. Who has a YouTube channel, and I'm not Catholic, and I talk about it. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt, but also take everything that Inspiring Philosophy says with a grain of salt. And he would tell you the same thing. He would tell you to go read the literature. And again, I really like Inspiring Philosophy. I love Trinity Radio. They take my questions all the time over there, and they treat me like royalty, and I really appreciate them. But yeah, in summary, I asked on a non-Catholic Christian YouTube channel if they were mind-body dualists. They said no for a lot of them. A lot of them are not mind-body dualists. But Catholics don't have that option. Catholics have to be mind-body dualists. But then they went on to say, but if I was a mind-body dualist, I wouldn't be concerned because of quantum mechanics. But as we looked at in these articles, we can't appeal to quantum mechanics in order to get past the mind-body dualism problem. Conservation of energy still applies. Quantum mechanics cannot be used as a workaround here. So we're back to square one for Catholics. Catholics are stuck at the mind-body problem. There is no easy out for Catholics. They cannot just simply say, well, I'm not a mind-body dualist. Catholics must be mind-body dualists. Catholics can't say, oh, quantum mechanics gets rid of that. Quantum mechanics does not get rid of that, despite what Eccles was saying, 20 and then also like 50 years ago. So with that, I've been Kevin Non-Tradicath, and until next time.